We want to talk today about climate change and what your strategies are for bringing Americans together to deal with the issue and the solutions that you think will work so that we can safeguard our people and our property and our future. And let me just tell you, in my case, I've been concerned about climate since the mid-1980s when I was a student at the University of Iowa.
Since before it was cool.
Thank you. And but what really changed my attitude and made me all in was experiencing the flood of 2008 here in Cedar Rapids. And it was, the students are probably some of them are old enough to remember it, but it was devastating. We had over 5,000 homes flooded, 1,000 businesses, churches, nonprofits, virtually every major facility of city and county government for a flood that was 10 feet higher than any flood Cedar Rapids had ever had before. So a real unprecedented event. And I think what I'd like to start off with is see what would you like to see us do as a country to safeguard people and property in the face of these increasing numbers of disasters, and what has your experience been facing climate-related events?
First, we need to let all Americans know that you are not on your own when it comes to climate change, that it's not for Cedar Rapids to somehow protect itself from periodic floods that have been historically unprecedented, but it's a national priority, and that we have the resources to try and make our communities more resilient in ways that frankly will save us money over time. Because is it easier to spend money to try and make your community more resilient or to clean up after the disaster? It's actually much easier to do the first thing. One of the reasons why we're having trouble making progress on climate change is that it looks different in different parts of the country. So here it could be floods. In other parts of the country, it could be forest fires that are ravaging parts of California. It could be droughts in the Southwest. It could be rising sea levels in a place like Louisiana that's made a town in Louisiana so uninhabitable that we actually moved everyone out of that town. So there are already climate refugees in parts of the United States. I've got a 60-page plan on climate change, and I'd love to go into it, though I think it would be probably a little bit dull if I just sort of went through all of it. So I'm just going to try and hit a couple of the very, very big principles. When a disaster strikes, whether it's a flood or a hurricane or a fire, who suffers the most?
The poor.
The poor. We all know that's the case. People that don't have shelter to go to or a car to drive away in. And we also know that the poor in America overlaps very heavily with communities of color. My flagship proposal, if you've heard anything about me, is that every American gets $1,000 a month, starting at age 18 until the day you die. And what this would do is this would make it so that families are able to protect themselves more straightforwardly. Because if there's a flood, would we trust the government to somehow account for every man, woman, and child in the community? Or do we think that if every household had $12,000 or $24,000 more a year, they'd be more likely to protect themselves? I think that most of us think that the latter is a more equitable way to go, that's more trickle up than top down. The second big thing is that right now, if you go to many Americans, including people right here in Iowa, even those who've experienced floods and other disasters, and say, hey, we need to combat climate change, some of them, many of them, are living paycheck to paycheck. 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost half of us can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. And so if you go to them and say we need to worry about climate change, what will some of them respond?
I can't afford my bills.
I'm worried about paying next month's rent. I can't worry about a problem that's 5-10 years down the line. So this pervasive financial insecurity is actually making it harder for us to make progress on climate change. And if you say we need to fight climate change, what do many Americans hear? They hear, what's it going to cost? Is this going to be more inconvenient for me? And is this going to cost jobs? That's what many Americans hear. And that's what we have to alleviate. We have to let people know that this is actually good for the economy, it's pro-growth, it creates many, many new jobs. And the big problem right now is that we're actually not measuring the true cost of many of our activities. If you were to actually factor in the cost of climate change, how much does climate change cost, do you think, over time?
Trillions.
Multiple trillions of dollars, as well as, unfortunately, thousands of American lives, maybe tens of thousands of American lives or hundreds of thousands over time. So if you factor that cost in, all of a sudden you realize that it's very, very expensive to do nothing. And that if you're a manufacturer, that you're emitting various things that contribute even marginally to climate change, right now that cost is being borne by all of us and is not being borne by the individual manufacturer. So what we have to do is we have to build in the price of climate change into our activities and let people know that this is actually pro-growth and it's going to create jobs for us as we try and move our country in the right direction in terms of our consumption of energy and renewable sources. The harsh, harsh truth, how many of you saw, and you can lie, it's fine, how many of you saw the debate in Detroit, which was, I want to say 3 debates ago? So if you remember that debate, you remember when I staked out the new 3rd position in America on climate change? Position number 1, very familiar to you all, we need to fight climate change. Position number 2, climate change is a hoax, we don't need to worry about it. I know, some people actually maintain that and believe that. Most of them are bought and paid for by the fossil fuel companies.
Yes.
And then my new position number 3, it's worse than you think.
Yeah.
We are 20 years behind on climate change by any scientific measurement. And here's the tough, tough truth. The United States of America is only 15% of global emissions. So even if we were to somehow get to 0 very, very quickly, what would happen in terms of the rate of change? It might slow down a tiny bit, but it would keep warming. Particularly when you account for the fact that the last 4 years have already been the 4 warmest years in recorded history. Like, we're already on the curve. And even if we were to go to 0, the curve will continue to rise. In Africa, what's happening is the Chinese government is showing up and saying, we've got a coal-burning power plant for you. And what does the African government say?
Yes, please.
Yes, please, great. Like, they're not worried about emissions, they're just worried about getting access to cheap energy for their own economic development. So what do we have to do if we want to change that? We have to be there at the table and saying to the African government, don't take the coal-burning power plant, take these solar panels, and we will subsidize them to a degree that it's actually a no-brainer. We subsidize different exports all the time, but we are not at that table with the African government, and that's where we need to go. We need to get our own 15% under control, and then we have to export renewable technologies as quickly and as cheaply as possible.
All right, well.